Oh, broadcast. Here we go. Here we go. Oh my gosh. Here we go. Like, what is going on? Okay, here we go. Here they come.
That's better.
All right, good thing we asked.
I know. Here we go. All right, everybody, welcome. Please tell us where you're coming from in the chat. We'd love to hear where everybody is right now. And welcome. Before we get started with Les, just let you know, next week the webinar with Alberto Lenz on choline has been canceled for the moment. Alberto needed to run to Mexico City for a work emergency, and we'll reschedule. We will let everybody know when that will be rescheduled. So just stay tuned. If you did already donate for that, I'm going to return your donations until we do have that rescheduled. Also, August 25th, we have scheduled Bill Levasseur from the Mass Museum here in San Miguel de Allende. Will be returning on August 25th at 5 p.m. He will be focusing on 8 masks and 8 specific dances related to those masks. So by popular demand, he was asked to do something more focused, and so he'll be working on that on August 25th. So please go to our website and sign up for that. That is already up on our website. And if you do have a chance to fill out our evaluation, we'll be posting that in the chat a little bit later. We're always trying to make these better and bring you webinars that are valuable to you. So please fill out the evaluation. If you have some time, you'll also get that evaluation link in the follow-up email tomorrow. And finally, if you have not donated yet for this webinar, please do so on our website, and we'll post that in the chat. All right, we are so excited to welcome Les Carmona, and we're so excited to hear what he has to tell us today. And a little bit about Les. At the age of 12, Les entered the world of food preparation and service, spurred on by his desire to experience flavors and experiment with recipes and techniques. And fulfilling a lifelong dream at the age of 40, he enrolled in a technical college in Chicago to earn a degree in baking and pastry arts. 1 year in, Les made the opportunity to study in France at La Varenne École de Cuisine, which launched, excuse my French, by the way, which launched his new career as a pastry chef. First for a Rely and Chateau property in Montecito, California, then in the wine country of Napa and Sonoma. So feeling about 107 years old, measured in chef years, he and his wife moved to La Paz, Baja Sur, where he opened a European-style bakery and pastry shop. And in 2015, just after becoming a Mexican citizen, which I need to talk to you about, Les and his family moved to San Miguel de Allende, Mexico, where he continues his exploration of food and culture. So without further ado, we welcome Les Carmona.
Hi, everybody. I'm having a kind of trouble with my internet connection. This is Mexico, after all. And what I'm going to try to do is switch the presentation to have the phone open as well, so I can jump back and forth, or maybe Telmex will give me a decent connection these days. So let's find out what's going on. Okay, can everybody hear me? I hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Les.
Okay, well, no need to really see me. I would much rather, Lynn, I'd much rather that you pay attention to the presentation rather than looking at me. But I'm going to go ahead and start if that's okay with you. So welcome. Thank you for joining me from whatever corner of the world you're quarantined in. I can see some of you from New York, some from Texas, some from here in San Miguel Allende. My name's Les Carmona. As Ginger said, I've worked in food service most of my life. 25 years ago, I became a professional chef, and about 15 years ago, I moved from California to Mexico. Slide, please. Along the way, I've found that, got it? Second slide. No, do you have, I don't see it yet. Do you have the map there? Everybody sees the map? Okay. The best way to know a new country is to explore their food culture. And during my session today, I'll be talking about my adopted country, Mexico. There it is. And the incredible diversity of foods that are available to the world that came from here. Mexico became one, and its borders extended from Oregon to Louisiana, down through Central America, reaching halfway down the western coast of Peru. It also included Cuba and Jamaica. Within this area, there were the Otomi and the Toltec people, then the Mayan Empire, the Aztec Empire, and the Purépecha people. The voice of the peoples of Mesoamerica were Nahuatl, and I'll be using the Nahuatl words for the foods of the Milpa and explaining them as we go. Next slide, please. The three sisters, collectively known as the Milpa, this system of crop cultivation forms the generous microcosm that built and sustains Mexico. And within the Milpa, we find the seven warriors, and at its core, the Holy Trinity. When I think of the Milpa, I'm thinking of a perfect model in harmony with nature. And by perfect, I mean a system in equilibrium, self-sustaining. The Holy Trinity of corns, beans and squash, excuse me. Corn stalks rise up to 3 meters. Oh, may I have the next slide, please? Okay, next slide. Waiting for it to come up on my, there it is. The corn rises up 3 meters and it serves as a trellis for the beans. And in exchange, the beans provide nitrogen to the corn. The squashes grow at the base of the plant and help to conserve moisture in the soil. The structure of its leaves and the substance it releases protect the garden from certain animals and insects. Also in the Milpa, let's see, is a great variety of wild edible greens called quelites. You might call them weeds, but their flavor and nutritional value are incomparable. You'll also find the flowering amaranth and chia growing amongst the quelites. People will plant the chili and the tomatoes. They act as a natural insect repellent for the rest of the crop. And there'll also be rows of nopal cactus and other succulents such as the maguey. The maguey is what we get our mezcal from. Because of the enormous impact the seven warriors of Mesoamerica had on the rest of the world, in 2002, an intangible cultural heritage gift to the world. There's only one other country that has been similarly recognized. As Europe had discovered Mexico and brought in their own food culture, we Mexicans incorporated them and added them to our kitchen repertoire while still preserving the recipes and procedures that sustained the Maya, Aztec, and the Incan empires. Next slide, please. Before the Spanish came, there weren't any domesticated animals other than the Choloitzcuintli, which you can see on your screen. There weren't any livestock, no pigs, no horses, no chickens. That means there were no beasts of burden, no plow animals either. There weren't any grapes or olives, so there was no wine and no olive oil. And that meant that no fats were used in cooking. Avocado and fish provided the dietary fats. The animal proteins were from wild animals, from reptiles, birds, such as the Muscovy ducks and wild turkey, and aquatic life. Next slide. Plus insects. What you'll see on your screen as soon as it refreshes is a gusano, or moth larva, growing on the corn. And they were plucked from the corn, given a quick saute in a dry pan, and scooped up to make tacos, full of proteins. The little kids would go out into the Milpa garden, and while the ears of corn were maturing, they'd pull the gusanos off the ears and then take them home to mama, and they would eat them for lunch. Back then, the main grain, and still today, is corn. Remember, there wasn't any wheat. And the tortilla was called tlaxcali, which means corn cake. And if somebody folded a tlaxcali around the filling, the food was called a tlaxco, which changed its sound and spelling a bit to become the taco. Tlaxco means half, folded in half. And if you have a giant filled tlaxcali, it's called a tlayuda. You take this pounded corn mass, maybe 15 inches in diameter, and you spread bean paste on it and some quilites and maybe some crickets or something, and that's called a tlayuda. There is, I have to admit, another explanation for tacos. I'm in Guanajuato in central Mexico, well known for its silver mines. And here in Guanajuato at the mines, small explosive charges were used to break up the rocks. The miners would fold paper around blasting powder and stuff them into the cracks around the wall. These explosive charges were called tacos. That's from the Spanish word taquear, which means to fill up with. And at lunchtime, when the miners unpacked their lunches, their wives had put little rolled up tortillas with fillings in them, and they would eat that and they could fill up their bellies. And who knows? They would also accompany and wash it down with drinks fortified with amaranth or chia seeds. Can I have the next slide, please? Today, there are three main types of corn crops. There's field corn, sweet corn, and the third one, yes, popcorn. So if they were watching a program, did they put butter on their corn? Well, there weren't any cows, so they didn't have any milk, they didn't have any butter. They used chili and other things to eat their simple. By the way, the corn all came originally from over 10,000 years ago, a little prairie grass called teosintli, about 3 inches long and only 12 little seeds in the sheath. That word, teosintli, teo means divine or creator, and sintli means corn. We call it maíz because the scientific name is zea maize, or maíz in Spanish. And on a side note, the cocoa bean is also from Mesoamerica, and its name is Theobroma cacao. And there's that teo prefix again, hence food of the gods, Theobroma cacao. In Nahuatl, it was called cacoatl, or bitter seed water. Corn itself is very difficult to digest and not particularly nutritious. It's only 3.5 grams of protein per 100 grams. And fortunately for all of us, it was discovered that adding a pinch of ground limestone to the cooking water, about 1.5% of the total, will trigger astounding changes to the corn. The first thing that happens is that the cellulose and pectin pericap, or outer hull, begin to soften and break down. Bound niacin within the corn becomes free niacin. Sugar molecules form and the mass becomes sweeter. The pectin begins to activate in the presence of the sugar, and it starts to gel, which allows the ground corn to stick together. I don't know if you cook at home, but if you've ever made jam at home, you know that the pectin needs sugar to make it set properly. Most importantly, the protein level goes from 3.5 to 9%. And this substance causing the miracle is called calcium hydroxide. Calcium hydroxide is also known as cal, slaked lime, quicklime, and pickling salt. Have you ever heard of any of those? Maybe. Next slide, please. There we go. Other uses of this cal is to make whitewash or chalk paint, to lie down the stripes in football fields and baseball fields, and they're added to concrete for fast curing. Many residents of San Miguel make their own paint using nopal cactus sap, salt, and cal. And after it cures for 3 days, it's ready to be used. That photo slide on your screen are several colors of cal paint. When people are painting their exteriors, they'll put up samples of the different colors and look at it, and that's how they decide which color they want. Next slide, please. There's a legend on how the nixtamalization process was discovered. It says that while a family was preparing their corn gruel around 6,000 years ago, a big wind blew some of the ash from the fire into their cazuela, the cooking pot. And they did not want to insult the corn. They decided to remove the clay pot from the fire and allow it to cool down so they could try to salvage it. The superstition of corn says that corn may not be wasted, that corn, before it is added to the pot, must be cooked. To be cooked must be spoken to lovingly so as to encourage it not to be fearful of being cooked. And these were the words of our grandfathers and grandmothers, full of superstitions then as they still are even to this day. It was also said that if some of the corn spilled onto the ground, whoever noticed it was obliged to pick it up. And if he did not, the corn would be insulted and it would complain to the gods and say, "He didn't pick me up, he spilled me. Make him starve because he's not appreciating me." Anyway, back to the story of nixtamalization. The next day after the water had cooled off, they picked up the grains and started brushing try to get the ashes off, and the corn husk was coming off in their hands. They were so surprised, but they decided to go on with the process. They scraped the corn off to the stone grinding table, the metate, and started to grind up. And instead of it being a watery gruel, thanks to the pectin, it began to form into little clumps. And they picked up these clumps and flattened it in their hands, thus making the first tortillas. It smelled wonderful. They gave some to all of their neighbors, and the neighbors said, "What did you do?" "Well, we think it was the ashes." People started dumping their ashes into the pot, and the same thing happened. After about a month of doing that, they noticed that they had more energy and they felt more full. The word nixtamal is the Nahuatl word. It's two words put together: nixtli, which means ashes, and tamali, which is a mass of dough. And that's the word that we use today for tamales. It's just a mass of dough with stuff put in it. The ashes themselves from the fire have 25% calcium hydroxide, but as they found out later, the limestone rocks that lined the fire pit were a much stronger provider of the magic dust. May I have the next slide, please? This photo that's coming up is a crank mill grinder for home use, which replaces the metate, and it gets the food on the table so much faster. And this is important because the entire process of cooking and then resting and grinding the corn can take up to 8 hours. With this hand grinder, it only takes 14 hours, so you save a full 4 hours. And good news for the home gardener, the leftover cooking water is killer. People here will use it as snail bait. It's called nehoyatl, or ashes broth. All right. Let me just check and see if there are any comments or questions so far. No, we're good. All right. Knock that down. Okay, there we go. Here in Mexico, to use genetically modified corn for planting is illegal. However, industrial farming in the US that does use genetically modified corn is so much cheaper. And we buy that to make that corn flour that you find in big bags in your supermarket shelves. It's very attractive because it's cheaper and much more convenient, but it's really not as healthy for you. The type of corn used for making tortillas or tamales or any of the other 600 recipes that use nixtamalized corn is the field corn or dent corn. It's also used to make ethanol. Corn on the cob that people in the US are used to is much sweeter, less starchy. It doesn't have enough pectin to make it dough. There's another benefit of nixtamalization, but it's really not brought up because we don't like to think of diseases. But after the grains are stored in the silo, the grains can be contaminated by cereal fungi called aflatoxins. And cooking the corn in this water kills any of the fungi that remain. There's another thing that happens in nixtamalization. I said that already. I apologize. Every spring after the growing season is over and the corn is started to dry and ready to be harvested, if there are unseasonable rains, that can trigger the corn on the stalk getting wet, and it triggers the growth of the Ustilago fungus. The resulting growths are called huitlacoche. And those are the Nahuatl words for dormant excretion. It doesn't sound pretty, but in Mexico and in gourmet kitchens around the world, this huitlacoche is hailed as the Mexican cord truffle. It's delicious. And in fact, it has a protein level of 12%, almost 4 times as much as ordinary corn, plus the added benefit of having the essential amino acid lysine. Bodies can't produce lysine, which is important for proper growth, and it's responsible for converting fats into protein, and it lowers cholesterol. Next slide, please. Dried beans, number 2 in the Trinity. Oops, there's the nixtamalized corn growing. Can we go to the next slide after that? Missed my cue. When I was growing up, I absolutely hated eating beans. But it turns out I just never tasted beans that were cooked properly. If you cook them in a clay pot with no salt added until the very end of the cooking, absolutely delicious. Now, the Spanish, besides bringing their own food culture of eating rice and Middle Eastern spices like cinnamon and citrus fruits and bread and wine and brandy, they also brought their own prejudices. They disdained beans. They called it peasant food, unworthy, going so far as to assigning the scientific name of the beans as Phaseolus vulgaris, the vulgar bean. Why? Well, rice was white, and the beans they found in the Aztec culture were the black beans of the Yucatan. Spain had just driven out the dark-skinned Moors from their country, ended 800 years of being a minority. What this vulgar bean provides us, though, is a powerhouse of energy and dietary fiber, 19% protein. And when you mix it with nixtamalized corn, you have 28% protein. Steak, on the other hand, 14% is all. And when you add the third sister to the mix, completing the Holy Trinity, slide, squashes. Whether they're summer squashes like zucchini or winter squashes like acorn or butternut, they're all part of the cucumber family, and so are watermelons. They provide over a dozen essential amino acids, which, when combined with corn and beans, gives our bodies everything we need to stay healthy, and they make a complete protein. Squashes, easy to grow. Even my wife grew some squashes this year. They often mature in as little as 6 weeks. Winter squashes with their hard shells can be stored over the cold season, some for up to 10 months. The squash blossoms are edible as well, and the seeds. They're toasted for a snack or ground into a flour for thickening moles. I mentioned before that the Spanish warning had nothing to do with peasant food relying on imports from their home countries. Wheat was brought over so the Catholics could take the Eucharist. And since there were no grapes and sacramental wine was essential, grapevines came over as well. In 1599, wine was so plentiful and so good in Mexico that the Mexicans stopped buying wine with its expensive taxes added in from the Spanish. And the viceroy, the vice king of Spain, said, "You guys have to buy our wine from Spain." They said, "Why would we want to do that? Our wine is so much better and so much cheaper." "Well, if you don't, you'll be sorry. What are you going to do?" Well, in 1699, suddenly all the fields went up in flames. And it wasn't until the prohibition in the United States in 1921 that Mexican wines began to reflourish. Next slide, please. Chilies. In Mexico, over 84 species of chilies, ranging from the Swedish bell peppers all the way to the hottest habanero chilies. Local lore says the pointy tip chili will be hotter than the same variety with a rounded tip. A few factoids. Salsa is what our ancestors used instead of a salt shaker. You go to a pre-Hispanic food restaurant here in Mexico and you won't find a salt and pepper shaker on the table. Chilies change their name depending on whether they're dried or fresh. The poblano chili that's used to make the chiles rellenos become the ancho chili when they're dried. And the jalapeno chili, everybody knows the jalapeno, right? Well, if it's smoked and dried, that becomes the chipotle chili, which is a combination of the two words chili and potle, or smoked. And maybe that's why they call it pot when you smoke it. Sorry, couldn't help it. And during the rainy season, the chilies get more water, and that'll reduce the amount of heat in the fruit. A remedy for the bite of chili, everybody knows, take some yogurt or something like that. Move your cursor. Thank you. And that's fine and all. You went backwards. Would you go forward 1, 2? Oh, you were. I told you wrong. You have to go back again to have that figurine. Sorry, guys. There were no cows. They couldn't take yogurt or milk. So what did they do? Well, actually, they didn't mind so much that spiciness. Misbehaving kids would be lifted up by their ankles and held upside down over a fire pit filled with smoking chilies as punishment. And warriors during battles would hurl clay pots as chili smoke bombs at their enemies. Actually, what did it was, for Mexico, it's limes. But before there were limes, which came over with the Spanish, we used tomatoes. May I have the slide for tomatoes, please? The tomatoes are very, very acidy, and that acid cools off the bite of the chilies. The word tomato itself is an Aztec word, a Nahuatl word. Tom means fat and atl means water. So fat water. Maybe that's why if you're fat, they say you have a tummy. I don't know. The tomato here, actually they were down from Peru and they came up, but they were wild. They just started growing. When they were cultivated, the picture is of the today's tomatillos, but more or less that's what they look like. In the picture, those are called miltomate because when cultivated, they went into the milpa and they became miltomates instead of the tomatos. Later on, they noticed that some of them were starting to turn red, and those were sweeter tasting, and they started to cultivate those. Today, when you go into the supermarket, if you want these green acidy tomatoes, you ask for tomates or tomatillos. If you want the Roma tomatoes, the red ones in the Italian cooking, those are called just jitomates, red tomatoes. And if you want the round ones like you get in the United States, those are called jitomate bola or ball tomatoes. Slide, please. The next slide is of cactus, especially the paddle cactus or the nopal cactus. People claim that it prevents cancer. I do know that it lowers cholesterol and has a low glycemic index, and it helps quite a bit for people with prostate problems. Do you recognize that protuberance at the end of the paddle? That's called a tuna. By the way, in Spanish, olives are called aceitunas. That's a portmanteau of aceite, meaning oil, and tuna, meaning fruit. So an aceituna is an oil fruit. The cactus fruit is very sweet and it makes wonderful jellies, refreshing beverages, and sorbets. Just remember to take the spines off, okay? Next slide. As you take a look at the slides here, I want to mention again the Moorish influence in Mexican foods. The Moors ruled Spain for 8 centuries until 1492. And the aguas frescas of Mexico were the charbats of Islam. Mole sauce, everybody knows the chocolate sauce, mole? Well, that was another cultural food transfer. It has its roots in Middle Eastern curries. The word itself for mole is taken from muli, which means sauce. And once you added the chocolate and the cinnamon and all the other things, they started being called moles. I don't know if I should or not, but I think I'm going to. Tomatoes again. I was looking up as I was doing this, I was thinking, why in the world were tomatoes called love apples? And did Adam and Eve have tomatoes instead of apples in the Garden of Eden? Well, that's impossible because tomatoes didn't get to Europe or to the Middle East until roughly 1539. So that's out. It turns out that the French word love apple, pomme de more, was a mispronunciation of the Venetian or a dialect in Italian, pomo di more, which means the Moorish apple. And because the first ones that came over were dark-skinned like the Moors, that's how it became the love apple. All right. I wanted to show you the paella as well. Just another little trivial note there. There was no rice, so there was no paella. But when the Spanish came here, they missed their traditional paella. There was no saffron. And to emulate it, people started adding tomatoes to their sauteed rice. And that's how we have Mexican rice today. It's a copycat dish to make paella. All right, slide please. Amaranth and chia. These are the superfoods of seeds in Mexico. Both are extremely high in protein and omega-3 and 6 fatty acids. They were the Aztec staples. Amaranth and chia were a key part of the diet, not just for food, but also as part of their religious ceremonies. When Cortez and the Spanish conquistadores arrived in the 16th century, amaranth crops were burned and its use forbidden because amaranth was used in pagan rituals where animal-shaped figurines molded of amaranth and honey were used. Fortunately, the plant was never quite eliminated. Today, an amaranth and honey bar lives on, and in Mexico, it's called an alegría, which translates to joyfulness. Amaranth can be popped like popcorn, and it's used also in granolas. Just like quinoa, it's a seed. Amaranth plant has up to 60,000 seeds in one plant. Chia seeds, on the other hand, not only for ornamental decorations as novelties, but the chia seed can hold 3 times its weight in water, and it was ground into flour or eaten whole as a kind of a on-the-go trail mix for the Aztec runners delivering messages from tribe to tribe. It comes in at a whopping 26% and has more protein and omega-3 and 6 than salmon. Salmon has only 23. Next slide, please. Here in San Miguel de Allende and elsewhere in Mexico, as October transitions into November, the celebration of the Day of the Dead has the doorways, altars, windows. These altars are called ofrendas. They're decorated with the purple amaranth blossoms and the orange marigolds. The green corn stalks are also used to build the ofrenda, and those are called the ocholi. The Catholic Bible says that the color purple represents the rich, royal, and the supreme authority. And in the Aztec belief, the marigold represents the scent of the marigold flower leads the souls from the afterlife back to the terrestrial plane. The marigold petals, the cempasúchil, 20-petal flower, are edible and together very pretty. And if you remember, as long as we're talking about the Day of the Dead, the Cholo Escuintli dog, well, that dog, the oldest domesticated animal in all of Mesoamerica, was the spirit animal for the Mayan and the Aztec. And the Cholo Escuintli was the animal that led your anima, your soul, to the beginning of your 4-year crossing into Mictlan, the inframundo. Next slide, please. The reason why, the primary reason for converting a nomadic existence like the Otomi had into an agrarian society is to ensure a steady supply of year-round food. That's why the winter squashes were so important, because they would last over the hard winter. This beginning of cultivation happened around 900 Common Area, and it started with the Toltecs. So instead of constant foraging, the 7 warriors represent the main foods that keep well and provide the basis for a solid and healthy existence. The milpa is a crop growing system used throughout Mesoamerica. The word itself is a Spanish term which means field, and it's derived from the Nahuatl phrase mili pa, to the field. Mili, field, pa, towards. This cycle of the milpa, when you're making milpa, you have a small plot of land divided into 4 quadrants. You plant 1 quadrant, 2 years of cultivation, and then 6 years of letting the area lie fallow. Agronomists point out that this system is designed to create relatively large yields of food crops without the use of artificial pesticides or fertilizers. Every day in Mexico, we use the method of planting to give life to ourselves and to give life back to them. In the milpa, that symbiotic relationship is created where the corn provides shade for the squashes and the trellis for the beans, while the tomatoes and chilies help fix nitrogen back into the soil. And just prior to planting a fallow quadrant, the dried grasses are set in fire and burnt to renew the ground. May I have another slide, please? In addition to the milpa, surrounding the ancient city of Tenochtitlan, which is now called Mexico City, you will find the chinampas, and they're still active today, a famous tourist destination. The canals of Xochimilco in southern Mexico City. Xochimilco means the place where the flowers are grown. Xochimilco. The vestiges of this ancient water system that surrounded and supplied water and sustenance to the Aztec city of Tenochtitlan still produces fruit and vegetables for the area. These floating gardens are accessed by boarding a flat-bottomed boat called a trajinera, powered by Pullman, much like the gondoliers of Venice. Next slide, please. Tenochtitlan, referred to as the White City for its gleaming white palaces, was surrounded by these floating gardens anchored to the lake bed by the roots of the plants that grew on the upper surface of the rafts. Imagine Cortez and his conquistadores walking towards this city, which had 10 times the population, by the way, of the Spanish city of Granada. And they saw peasants pushing the soil. They thought, this is going to be a pushover to conquer them. But there wasn't enough land around Tenochtitlan to supply everybody, and they planted these raft islands for all of the food. Once they actually got to the city of Tenochtitlan, they were equally as amazed as the Moctezuma and his followers were of the conquistadores. Next slide, please. There's a vibrant local economy all over Mexico, in spite of our present situation of the virus and everything else. Mexico, San Miguel is no exception. Surrounding our town of 75,000 are another 110,000 connected to this agrarian society. Many of the fields are small enough that there are one tractor operation that can be tended to in 1 to 3 days. There is a real connection to the foods consumed in Mexico and San Miguel de Allende. It's been noted that the making of milpa is the central and most sacred act, one that binds together the family, the community, the universe. It forms the core institution of the indigenous society in Mesoamerica and Mexico, and its religious and social importance often appear to exceed its nutritional and economic importance. This is the end of my presentation. I'm going to fiddle with trying to get Zoom back up so I can participate in the Q&A. Would you do me a favor and close that lid? Shut the lid.
Les, I have a question.
Go ahead.
You mentioned that GMO, genetically modified corn, is illegal in Mexico. Was that how did that come about? Do you know?
Well, it came out by small NGOs, non-government. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, small non-governmental organizations such as, oh, I can't even think of the names right now. They just left me. But it was the first law was passed in 2014, right around the time of what the heck's his name? Enrique Peña Nieto, as part of the little bit of a restructuring of the NAFTA. And that's when it started. Now, because of the force of this groundswell movement, the foods of Mexico are protected, and you cannot genetically modify any of the foods in Mexico.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there other questions that I can answer?
There aren't any in the queue. Oh, there's one right there.
Hi.
Let's see. Sally Folt says that she's read that true Mexican maize was dying out as American corn is cheaper.
Well, it is very true that American corn is cheaper. And again, people are trying to bring back the heirloom corn. I know that even within the United States, they're kind of sold out, but you can go on to Amazon and other sites and purchase heirloom organic corn from Oaxaca or Guanajuato. It's labor intensive, it's more expensive, and with so much corn being grown in the United States, it's hard. Mexico is trying its best to keep it going. We've already lost popcorn. There's no one producing popcorn anymore, as far as I know. It's no longer a commercialized crop. But the field corn for making tortillas is still available. And if you've ever tasted a tortilla made with heirloom corn, there's absolutely no difference. It's fantastic.
Thank you. We have a question from Randy Leah, who asks, are there restaurants, I assume he means in San Miguel, that serve food cooked in the ancient manner?
Not necessarily in the downtown area. My wife and I drive 9 or 14 kilometers, depending on which direction we're going to. And there's a place along the highway that's called Gorditas Don Ciro. I don't know if you've heard of it, but they use, one's out by La Cieneguita, the other one's out just on the road to Taboada. And they use the heirloom corn. They will use, they still will use manteca into some of the things. You have to go to Querétaro, Mexico City, as far as I know. We did have, what was the name of the restaurant? It was here in San Miguel 4 or 5 years ago, and they had a pre-Hispanic. I don't remember the name, but currently we don't have any.
Okay. Lynn Knox asks, where do you buy amaranth? How do you cook it? And how do you use it in meals?
Amaranth, you can buy it anywhere in Mexico, in any of the tiendas de autoservicio, grocery stores. It mostly comes pre-popped, and you can just sprinkle it on your yogurt or make your own version of Rice Krispie treats. And you can buy it in the local, what do you call them? The centros de abastos, or the central markets. You can go to the stores called Mías and Cereales, and you can buy the amaranth seeds. You'll just rinse them, let them dry, and then dry toast them in the pan.
Great.
These are terrific questions.
Iman Bloom asks, is there anything harmful about the limestone used for masa?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Calcium hydroxide is the weaker cousin of sodium hydroxide, which is drain opener.
Ooh.
So you have to make sure that you don't get it on you when you're adding it to the water. And that's the reason why it must be rinsed once or twice. There's still traces amount of cal in the corn, but not enough to hurt you. But if you take it directly out of the pot and start to grind it, you're going to get a burning sensation on your lips. Yes, so yes, there's a modicum of caution that has to be taken.
Lynn Knox asks if you could please explain again what popped amaranth is.
Well, it's like popcorn. It's just you dry pop it and it puffs up. Or popped rice.
I've seen it actually in like the cereal section in Comer, and it looks like Rice Krispies, like you said, the little Rice Krispie things, right?
Yes, but it's very, very small. It's smaller than it's about the size of mustard seeds, a little bit smaller than millet. And it pops up about twice its size. At any of the fairs or the candy stores, you can buy the alegrias. Sometimes they'll mix other things in with them, like pumpkin seeds, pepitas, and the whatever. But originally, those replaced animal sacrifice. When they decided that it was no good making animals suffer just because they needed to sacrifice something, they made the animals out of amaranth, and it was sweetened with honey. Of course, they couldn't use any kind of sugar because it wasn't until the Spanish got here that we had any kind of sugar.
They sell, my husband calls them like bird food. They sell little snacky things, little bars that look kind of like granola bars. They're light, and those are amaranth, right?
Yes, those are the alegrias.
Okay.
Exactly so.
Randy Leo says he's seen bread labeled as amaranth bread. That method is so different from popped amaranth. Is it a realistic process to include in bread?
Absolutely. It's a very high protein grain, and amaranth flour is available even in the United States. It's quite expensive because they make you go through all of the organic certification and all the processing to make sure it's not contaminated, because, you know, if you eat in Mexico, you're guaranteed to get sick. So, but yes, you can add, I don't know of any 100% amaranth bread, but I imagine you could make it. It doesn't have any gluten the way wheat does, but you could probably make amaranth cakes. Like a quick bread. Why not?
Sally Foltz asks, is there true Mexican maíz available in San Miguel or in markets or in restaurants?
You would have to go to some of the specialty stores. Luna de Queso, El Sabino will probably have it. I usually rely on my neighbors to provide me with what they need, because I have relatives out in the campo that are growing it.
Lee Knox asks, are the tlayudas made of the same masa as regular tortillas?
No, they're not. It's usually made of the hominy corn, white corn, and although it is cooked the same way the nixtamalized corn is, actually, that's not true. It's blanched and then not cooked. They put it, let's see, you can see me, so I'm going to turn the camera around. They put it into stone vessels and put the cacahuazontle, the corn seeds, into it, and they use a pounder. They use a pounder. It's like I'm masturbating, sorry. But they'll pound the corn, and then they'll spread it out into a disc and let it dry. And this is a process they'll do maybe 30, 40, or 50 of them, and they're dry, not very appetizing crackers, like a flatbread, like the what's it called, brick, B-R-I-K. And then to use it again, they'll brush it with usually some animal fat, and then toasted over a fire so it's crispy. So corn is ground and tlayudas are pounded.
Thank you. Kareem mentions that a restaurant near Cañada de la Virgen run by an astronomy professor who helped figure out how the stars align with the pyramid there, and that serves traditional fare. She said she can't remember the name. Do you, might you know the name of that place? Have you heard of it?
It's one of the places I haven't had a chance to get out to yet, but I'm sure going to try and find it.
I actually just did a quick Google search, and it looks like there's several pre-Hispanic restaurants, including one called Restaurante Prehispanico, that says that there's another one, Sal Sabor Prehispanico.
Sabor, I think, was the one that's out of business now.
Okay, I was going to say, I wonder if, you know, how current these listings are given, you know, the quarantine and everything else that's happening.
That was the original one that I mentioned. I think it was down near Orizaba, something like that.
Rosemary Glenn asks, are there any books you would recommend for pre-Hispanic foods? Are there any books you would recommend pre-conquest foods?
I would look for just about any of the books by Diana Kennedy.
Okay.
She's 96 years old. She's recognized as an English-speaking chef in Mexico, won several awards, and she's often used to as reference material.
Ginger mentions that a documentary just came out about her.
Yes, I've been waiting to see if I can watch it without having to pay for it. Well, let's face it, when you've gone 6 months without working, it's a little bit hard.
For sure. Lynn Knox asks, what's your favorite dish that combines pre-Hispanic foods?
Whenever I go out to Gorditas Don Ciro, I have whatever they have, but one of the gorditas I have is always with the huitlacoche. And even if I'm just eating at home, I have beans with corn probably 5 days a week. It's just so easy. The idea of sacrificing animals for my plate, it's not necessary. I will occasionally eat chicken, and I dearly love barbecued pork, but I also suffered cancer and was up to 227 pounds, and now I'm cancer free, only weigh 167. So I want to thank the Milpa diet for contributing to my better health.
We had talked when we were publicizing your presentation. We wondered if the traditional diet would help with people who gained weight during the quarantine. So you.
Well, very much so. In the early 1900s, in the United States, in the world. And one of the things that was happening, you had the Spanish flu, you had the start of the Great Depression, you had the beginning of World War I. And all of this kind caused Mexico and the rest of the world to be in a huge famine. It led to the Great Depression. It didn't really end until, and there was also the Civil War in Mexico. How could I forget that? So many people lost their lives. There weren't enough people to raise crops. And it was the United States, with their beginning in food factories, that it wasn't until 1910 that we had our first flour tortillas. And the idea of adding lard to the food, that came over. That the idea of Tex-Mex was born during that time. And now most people in Mexico don't know the difference between what Mexican food used to be and what we're eating now. It's the reason why diabetes and obesity are the #1 and 2 killers here in Mexico.
We have more question. Lynn Knox also asks, what's your favorite squash and preparation?
It depends on the season. It really does. I eat a lot of zucchini because it's readily available, but the winter squashes, whether it's an acorn squash, whether it's a butternut squash, whether it's the kabocha squash, and there's another squash that if anyone's still listening, if you have a chance to find it, it's called chayote, C-H-A-Y-O-T-E. Some of them have little stones in it, some of them don't. Some of them are hairy, and some of them aren't, but it's really quite a neutral squash, full of water, full of liquid, that you can add just about anything to it, and you get all the nutrition of the squash without that beta carotene flavor. I also eat a lot of sweet potatoes, by the way, which are from Mexico as well.
The chayotes are readily available in the markets. I see those all the time, and I find them also in the bags when they pre-cut veggies to make your stew with was it like carrots and onions, and then there's usually chayote in there as well. Those are you find here.
When you're here, I just wanted to mention a couple of quick things. Jicama, a wonderful, wonderful treat, but you have to remember to hit it with chilies and some kind of acid. Otherwise, it does not taste very good at all. It tastes like eating a potato.
Well, there's two kinds of jicama, right? There's jicama de agua and jicama de leche, and I find that the jicama de agua are actually kind of pretty crunchy and taste and liquidy, not liquid, juicy. I think is that the difference?
I don't know. I have to find out. I didn't realize there were two.
I was told we passed the jicama de agua season. Well, whenever that was, I can't remember. Time seems to be going weird. But yeah, I think that's what somebody told me what the difference was. So you might have had the jicama de leche that was sort of not so tasty.
That could be. I wonder if it has anything to do with, well, I'll get back to you on what it is. Okay. Go ahead.
We have a comment from Anthony Bate, who says he's a chef in Oaxaca, and if anybody would like more information on amaranth, they have a great organization in Oaxaca that promotes the growth and use of it. Please, Anthony, he's asked if he'd love to share their website. Please do.
Yes, I see it there on my screen. Thank you.
And through this group, he discovered that amaranth was something used along with corn in making tortillas before it was banned. Why would
I can believe that? Sure.
Huh. Why do you think it was banned?
Amaranth? Well, it's because it was used to make pagan figurines. And the Spanish came over. They were the first evangelists. Picture Spain in 711 AD. All of Spain, except for just the very northern tip, was Spanish Catholic. The rest was Islamic or Moorish. And around 1150, Spain began to push out the Moors. And in 1492, no hay moros en la costa. They had driven out the last of the Moor. The coast is clear. And that's when Spain declared its freedom from Islam and started exploring and bringing in new empires, including the Philippines, France, Italy, Spain, and Mexico. Those were the 5 kingdoms of Spain, and it all because they finally drove out the Moors. And it started the Inquisition. If you were not Catholic, you had no reason to be in Spain. So yes, I didn't want to necessarily bring that up because that's a topic for a whole nother webinar on what the Spanish did to Mexico.
For sure. Rosemary Glenn comments that chayote tendrils are delicious and low glycemic. Glycemic?
Very, very true. Glycemic, a low glycemic index means that it will not elevate your blood sugar. So safe for diabetics.
Yeah. Anybody else have any comments, any questions? You want to add anything, Les?
Anthony is just saying thanks for having this interest in the Mexican food. I do want to just encourage people that want to read up more about it. Unfortunately, most of the literature that goes into a great deal is in Spanish. If you don't have the ability to read and comprehend in Spanish, it's going to be difficult. But if you go back to the library and get a book that was published in 2008 by Michael Pollan called The Omnivore's Dilemma, and in chapter 3, they're talking about how to make a garden that does not use fertilizers or pesticides. And this is the sort of thing that I really think that we need to see more of, because making Milpa is just such a way to connect back to the earth, back to society. All right, a little bit of religion here. In the Aztec religion, in the Mexican pre-Hispanic religion, you have two gods. You don't have, for everything there are two gods. It's because there's a duality, almost the yin and yang. It's everything comes together. Picture this, water. Okay, Mayahuil and Tlaloc. When water is masculine when it comes down from the sky because it penetrates the earth. And then the plants bring water forth and they give birth to the plants and the rivers and the liquid. So it's female in its water stage and male in its rain stage. And that just blew my mind because it opens up to so many other areas of discussion. And to understand when the Spanish put on their monotheism, their idea of just one God and looking at everything through the eyes of just one creator, that's what really caused the clash. I mentioned teosintli or monotheism, one God. Teosintli does not mean God. That's what the Spanish translated the word to. Teo means the divine or the creation without assigning it to any one God. And the gods like Huitzilopochtli was a person, but that person was the intermediary that spoke to God. And Moctezuma was one of the intermediaries that spoke to the gods. So they were not the gods. That's how the Mexican gods can have brothers and sisters and relatives and aunts and uncles and intrigue, because these were people, what we would call royalty, but they were people. Go ahead.
I have no other questions. I have no comments. I don't see any others in the chat. Corinne says, thank you for the interesting, informative presentation. And if there's no other comments and no other questions, Les, Ginger and I both want to thank you so much for being here today, for presenting. Very informative. And Ginger, do you want to add anything to that?
I had a question about mole. Did you say that mole has ingredients that aren't native to Mexico? Obvious. It has like things like cinnamon and nuts and things that aren't from here.
Well, absolutely. The original sauce was moli, M-O-L-L-I or M-U-L-L-I, depending on how you wanted to transliterate it from the Nahuatl language. And the Spanish did not want to eat any of this peasant food, these sauces that they saw, so they added their imported ingredients and made moles. If you have a sauce called pipián, have you heard of the green sauce called pipián? Which is ground pumpkin seeds and green tomatoes and things.
Yeah.
Well, if you ask a Mexican today, they will say that is a mole, but it really isn't. It's a mole. The mole is the one that was of Spanish origin. It's just that there's been such a syncretism, a blending and melding of the two, it's hard to tell them apart.
Okay. So there may have been a more like cacao-based sauce that didn't have those other ingredients in it.
Not as a mole. The Mexican people, the pre-Hispanics, would never think of using it as a cooking ingredient. It was always used as a beverage. Even the name of chocolate is cacaoatl, which means bitter bean water. It was always ground up and taken as a beverage. Now they would sometimes throw in peyote buttons or other psychotropics so that they could speak to the gods more readily. But yes, it wasn't until 1860 when Lindt and Van Houten perfected the process to turn the cocoa bean into a solid bar.
Okay.
It didn't exist. It was always a beverage.
Okay. Thank you, Les.
My pleasure. Thanks for letting me spout off. It was fun.
Super fun and interesting. And
all right.
We're going to record this as well. It will be on the website. So if anybody missed anything or wants to review, you can go back to the website in the next couple days and this recording will be there.
Terrific. On that last slide, I want to remind everybody, if you need to get a hold of me personally, you can go to milpasma@yahoo.com, and that's my email. All right, I'm going to go. Thank you guys so much.
All right, bye-bye.